The roar of jet engines echoed through the canyon. But it wasn't just any aircraft slicing through the sky. It was the unmistakable growl of the A-10 Thunderbolt II, known to soldiers on the ground as the Warthog. And on this day, at the controls sat a young female pilot whose courage would become the deciding factor between life and death. Down below, a team of Green Berets found themselves trapped, pinned by enemy fire in rugged terrain where escape seemed impossible. Radios crackled with urgency, hearts raced. And every second meant the difference between survival and tragedy. She wasn't supposed to be there that long. Her mission had been a routine patrol, nothing extraordinary. But fate has a way of rewriting the script. As she scanned the valley from her cockpit, she picked up the distress call. The voices coming through weren't just routine chatter, they carried fear, desperation, and the unspoken weight of men who knew their time was running out. The terrain itself was unforgiving, steep walls of rock rising high on both sides, making it almost impossible for conventional air support to respond effectively. Yet she didn't flinch. This pilot, trained to fly low, fast, and dangerously close, had one thing on her mind: those soldiers needed her. The A-10 wasn't built for beauty. It was built for moments exactly like this. With its titanium armor and powerful GAU-8 Avenger cannon, it was the guardian angel of troops on the ground. Still, flying through a narrow canyon under heavy fire wasn't part of the textbook. It was risky. It was unpredictable. But she knew she had no choice as she pushed her aircraft into the canyon. The walls seemed to close in, shadows flickering across her canopy as bullets cut the air. On the ground, the Green Berets looked up, relief mixing with disbelief. Their lifeline had arrived, and it was being flown by a woman who refused to let them fall. She made her first pass, unleashing a roar of firepower that shook the valley. The enemy scattered, but the battle was far from over. With every maneuver, she risked everything: her jet, her life, and her future. Yet she pressed on, knowing the fate of those soldiers depended on her. And just when it seemed she had turned the tide, the canyon itself demanded more from her. Would her daring gamble hold, or would the very walls that hid her enemies become her trap? The answer was still unfolding. The story of how she found herself in a canyon didn't begin with the roar of her engines that day. It started years earlier, when she first decided to step into a world where few women had gone before. Training to become an A-10 pilot was no easy path. The Warthog wasn't glamorous, was rugged, demanding, and required absolute focus to master. From day one, she knew she would have to prove herself. Not only to her instructors, but also to the very pilots who doubted if she belonged in the cockpit of such a fearsome machine. Every drill, every long night of study, and every flight test pushed her further. And yet, she never gave in. The A-10 became more than just an aircraft to her, became a symbol of resilience. By the time she deployed, she carried with her not just skill, but a reputation for precision and nerves of steel. The Green Berets she was now trying to save had never met her before. They didn't know her name, her story, or the battles she had already fought to earn her place. But in that desperate canyon, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she was overhead, making decisions that would change everything. The canyon itself was a nightmare for any pilot. Its sharp turns, jagged cliffs, and unpredictable winds created a deadly environment. Enemy fighters knew this well and had set their ambush perfectly. The Green Berets were trapped, unable to retreat, forced to take cover in shallow crevices as fire rained down on them. They had radioed for help, but few aircraft could even attempt to reach them in such terrain. That was why her arrival felt almost impossible, like a gamble no one else would have taken. But she had always thrived on challenges others avoided. Now, the only question was how long she could keep flying inside that narrow corridor before the canyon claimed her too, long before the canyon mission. She had learned that courage wasn't about never feeling fear, it was about pushing forward despite it. In flight school, she had been the one who showed up earlier than everyone else. The one who studied maps until her eyes burned. The one who never asked for shortcuts. The A-10 demanded that kind of dedication. It was a beast of a machine, powerful but unforgiving. And every pilot who flew it carried scars from training, both physical and mental. She had endured the pressure because she believed in what the aircraft stood for, protecting those on the ground, no matter the cost. Her fellow pilots often joked about the Warthog's looks, calling it ugly but effective. She didn't mind. In fact, she loved that it wasn't built to impress anyone. It was built to survive. Heavy armor, massive firepower, and the ability to loiter over the battlefield. Longer than almost any other jet, these traits made it the soldier's best friend. And now, in that canyon, every part of the A-10's design would be tested in ways few had imagined. The Green Berets below were seasoned fighters, trained for missions behind enemy lines, yet even they knew the odds were stacked against them. Surrounded and outnumbered, they had begun rationing ammunition, unsure if help would reach them in time. Their only comfort was the thunder overhead, the sound of her jet circling back for another pass. To them, it was the sound of survival. But the canyon wasn't forgiving. Each maneuver drained fuel faster than planned, and the walls left little margin for error. One mistake could mean disaster, not just for her, but for the men relying on her. Still, she stayed locked in, determined to find a way through, even as the enemy pressed harder. The fight was far from finished. Her hands gripped the controls tighter as the canyon narrowed, the walls pressing in like a vice. The A-10's engines roared, shaking against the turbulence created by the jagged cliffs. Every pass grew more dangerous, each turn tighter than the last, but she refused to break away. Below, the Green Berets clung to their positions, their radio calls clipped and urgent. They were running out of options, and she knew it. The weight of their lives pressed down on her shoulders with every second that ticked by. The enemy had realized she was their biggest threat. Heavy gunfire lit up the canyon, tracer rounds streaking across the sky in desperate attempts to bring her down. A flash burst past her canopy, close enough to make her heart jump. Her instincts screamed to pull back, but she held steady, diving lower, pushing her jet into the fight. The sound of the A-10's cannon thundered through the valley, echoing off the canyon walls like a storm. Dust and smoke rose from the ground, but through it all, she could see enemy fighters regrouping, refusing to yield. Fuel was dropping fast. Ammunition was being counted round by round. Yet the thought of leaving never crossed her mind. Her training told her there were limits, but her gut told her the mission wasn't finished. The Green Berets weren't just blips on her radar. They were men pinned against impossible odds, waiting for her to give them one more chance to survive. The canyon, however, seemed to be turning against her. Downdrafts jerked the aircraft. Cliffs loomed closer, and every maneuver carried the risk of disaster. Still, she pressed forward, circling for another strike. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The A-10, the soldiers below, the enemy fire, and the unforgiving canyon all converging toward a breaking point that would decide everything. Just as she steadied her aircraft for another run, the radio crackled with a warning that froze her breath. A second enemy force had been spotted moving toward the canyon from the north. The Green Berets weren't just trapped anymore, they were about to be surrounded. What had already felt impossible suddenly became even more urgent. If the reinforcements reached the canyon, the team below would have no escape route at all. Her mind raced. The A-10 was designed to take on armored targets, but not to fight in two places at once. Every second she stayed inside the canyon meant those enemy forces outside were closing in. She looked at her dwindling fuel gauge, then at the jagged cliffs rising beside her wings. There was no clear answer, no safe move left. The mission had just become a test not only of her skill, but of her ability to make decisions under crushing pressure. The soldiers on the ground didn't know about the second force yet. To them, survival meant holding out against the fighters already in the canyon. She could hear the strain in their voices, the crack of gunfire in the background, the silence between transmissions that spoke louder than words. Should she warn them? Or should she try to take the fight to both fronts before the enemy closed the trap completely? The canyon offered her no mercy. Wind shifted suddenly, jolting the aircraft closer to the rock face. She steadied the controls, but the reminder was clear one slip and it would all end in seconds. Yet beyond the danger of the cliffs, another truth pressed against her. This mission was no longer about just buying time. It was about stopping a disaster before it consumed everyone. And she knew the moment of decision was coming faster than she could prepare for. She pushed the throttle forward, the A-10's engines howling as she climbed hard out of the canyon. The Green Berets below held their breath, fearing she was gone. But in truth, she was setting up her boldest move yet. The second enemy force was closing fast, and she knew if they reached the canyon, the team would be crushed. She banked sharply, lining up her approach, and with a roar, the Warthog dove back in, unleashing a storm of fire that tore through the reinforcements before they could take position. The canyon lit up with chaos. Dust rose in thick clouds, smoke curled along the cliffs, and the echo of her cannon seemed endless. On the ground, the Green Berets seized the chance, rallying and breaking through the ambush. For the first time in hours, survival felt within reach. She had turned the tide not once, but twice, and the soldiers' voices over the radio carried relief and gratitude that words could barely capture. But victory never comes without cost. As she pulled the aircraft back through the canyon, alarms blared inside her cockpit. One of her engines had taken a direct hit. The A-10 could fly on one, but the damage meant every maneuver was now a fight against gravity itself. The controls shook in her hands, the cliff edges looming dangerously close. She steadied her breathing, reminding herself that the mission wasn't finished until everyone was out. With grit and precision, she guided the Green Berets to safety, circling overhead as long as her aircraft would allow. Finally, as the team broke free of the canyon's grip, she turned her battered Warthog toward base. The soldiers lived because she refused to quit. Yet the unexpected twist came later when reports spread. Many on the ground were stunned to learn their savior had been a woman. For her, it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about doing the job, no matter the odds. And in that canyon, against all obstacles, she had done exactly that when she finally landed her damaged A-10 back at base. The airfield fell silent for a moment. The aircraft was scarred with holes, its metal skin burned and torn, but it had carried her home. Ground crews rushed to her side, expecting her to stumble out shaken, maybe even broken. Instead, she climbed down quietly, exhaustion clear in her eyes. But with the calm determination of someone who had done exactly what needed to be done. News of the mission spread quickly. The Green Berets who had been trapped in the canyon told anyone who would listen about the pilot who had refused to leave them behind. To them, she was more than just air supports. She had been their shield, their lifeline in the darkest hours. For many, her voice over the radio had been the only thread keeping them from despair. They would never forget it. For her, the mission wasn't about recognition or headlines. It was about the promise every A-10 pilot makes: protect those on the ground no matter the cost. She knew the risks she had taken could have ended very differently. Yet she also knew she would make the same choice again if faced with it. That's what it meant to wear the patch, to fly the Warthog, to be trusted when lives were on the line. The canyon would remain in her memory, not as a place of fear, but as the moment she proved to herself that courage isn't measured by rank, gender, or even the aircraft you flit, measured by the choices you make when everything is on the edge. Her story became a reminder that heroes come in many forms, and sometimes The most unlikely warrior is the one who storms out of the canyon, carrying hope for everyone left behind. Every great mystery deserves an audience. If you loved this one, hit subscribe, like the video, and share it with your friends. Join the growing family of thriller seekers.